I am Carrie Brown with eXp Realty and the Preferred Advisors team, and I'm with April Comstock. She helps me co-lead this team. Hi, April.
Hi.
So now we're going to break down the contract itself. The really big disadvantages, our contracts are actually owned by the board that we work for. So we aren't allowed to just hand out contracts, obviously. And unfortunately, the first time most people get to see them is whenever they're writing it for the first time. So we're sitting down with you. We've been out looking for houses. We found one that you love. And now we're going to sit down and we're going to go through this big stack of paperwork that you're going to be seeing for the first time. So I was talking to Vern Jarboe one day, who's our local real estate attorney for our board, and said, I don't feel like this is fair. What can we do in lieu of giving them the contract to actually prepare a buyer so that they're seeing the ins and the outs? And he said, we'll put something together and let me review it. So that's what we did. And then he edited it and added things to it. So we have our own 3-page document that we use to really break down the contract, explain things. He added things that he sees a lot in litigation that actually isn't addressed on our board contracts. So we're going to go through that with you now. April, you want to take earnest money?
Sure. So, and like Carrie said, going over this beforehand is so important. And I always tell my buyers, the more you know, the more comfortable you are going to be with everything that's happening, and it's not going to be as scary, and we can enjoy the process a little bit more. And, it's just really great information. So once we find the house that you love and we're going to make an offer, you're going to need to submit an earnest money check once the seller has accepted your offer. And typically you need to submit that to title within a few days. And that, a lot of times the amount depends on the sales price of the property. So an $85,000 house sales price, the earnest money check is going to be different than like a $300,000 sales price earnest money check. So, but that does get deposited into the title companies into the escrow account. So you do need to make sure you have the funds for that. Whether it's 500, 1,000, 1,500. And then that is a good faith down payment, basically deposit on the property. And that protects you. It also protects the sellers, so that you're not going all over town writing up offers on properties. And then, say you did 3 offers and decided one was your favorite, and then those other 2 sellers are just kind of left in the dust. So the earnest money deposit is a good faith payment for that. And once the transaction goes through and, we're getting inspections ordered and all of that, if everything goes smooth, it's basically just taken off the remaining balance at closing. And then if, say, the transaction does fall through because of inspection repairs or something else, there is a chance that you might get it back. It really just depends on that, circumstance. But if you have ordered inspections, those inspectors will need to get paid. So a lot of times, even if a transaction falls through, you don't get a whole lot back, because typically inspections, do eat up a good chunk of the earnest money.
So the next point is registered offenders. And obviously, registered offenders are supposed to register. What we did find here in Kansas was that somehow, some way along the lines, there was a law passed to where people that had committed a crime prior to 1989 weren't required to report. We actually found that because of a particular property. We searched all over trying to figure it out. And they in turn found this error had taken place. I mean, I feel like it's an error. If you've committed the crime, you should probably still be reporting. But we actually, in the contract and in this document, we give you where to go and look for the neighbor. We can't make an assumption that it matters to you. We can't go out search it for you. We give you the information to do that for yourself. We have to, we acknowledge that you have the right to move and live wherever you like. If it doesn't bother you, then it doesn't bother us. So we just want you to have the information and be happy with, you know, what your decision is. So that's that. Each state has their own, where you can look it up, and there is a federal one also. So you definitely want to just look.
Right. And if you're concerned about crime, or maybe you don't know the area, maybe you're moving into, you know, you have a job transfer and you're moving into a community that you're not familiar with. Most communities have a website where you can check crime, you know, crime stats, and they'll even show you, you know, if they're robbery or assaults or different things like that. So it's always a good idea. As agents, we're not allowed to steer you to one neighborhood or another. So that's why it's just important that you're doing that checking for yourself.
And our contracts do address that and give you the websites, but we give it to you prior to, so that you can, while you're looking, you get the opportunity to you know, say yes or no before we even go look.
Right. When a lot of times with my buyers, if they send me properties that they are interested in, I will say, you know, go take a drive by the neighborhood, check it out, see if you like the street. If you're, you know, you like the neighborhood, if it's a good distance from your work or school. I mean, I think it's always a good idea kind of physically to go and look too, as a buyer, just so you know. I have read a really good thing that said to even go and check it during different times of the day, because traffic on the street might be different, or you know, it's just good to know. But I always like to have my buyers do that even before we schedule a showing, because a lot of times they'll drive by and they'll say, you know, like that street was way too busy, or, you know, different things. And it just saves some wasted time too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So radon is the next one. Again, we talked about this in a prior video, but radon is a natural gas, does cause cancer. It's number one in people who don't smoke, number two in people who do. Anything.
It's invisible.
It is totally invisible. It's
Can't smell it, can't see it.
Yeah, you wouldn't even know it was there. The bad thing is it does exist. So really understanding during the contract, we can negotiate repairs or mitigation of that. So they run a test for 72 hours. They give you the average amount that they find. Anything higher than 4 picocuries is considered too much. So that is when it needs to be mitigated. A mitigation in our territory, it usually costs around $1,000 to $1,200, maybe a little bit less, depending on how high the house is, whether or not there's a sump pit, you know, what's the ease of getting it done. So that price is based on, you know, what's going to go into getting it done. And then they pump it out into the atmosphere, you know, up over the roof, and takes care of it. They retest for it to make sure that it's okay. You have all the information that's actually on the machine itself, so that you know where to look if you think anything's kind of, you know, not working right. So definitely something that can be done. You want to have it done during the home inspection so that it can be negotiated. If you do it after the fact, like our local county extension office gives these little packets, and you can put it in the lower level, usually in a closed space, and let that stay for a certain period of time, mail it in. They tell you what the results are, and then you decide what to do. But once you've closed on the house, you can't go back to the seller or the agents or the lender or anybody and ask for it to be repaired, because that particular time frame has passed. So it's definitely something you want to do during the transaction.
Right. And the inspection, like I said in the other video, it's not an expensive inspection. I think it's 135, which probably, I mean, it depends on the inspector, obviously, but you know, the knowledge you're getting is really important one way or the other, like just peace of mind to know, okay, the property is good, or you know, it does need mitigation, and then we can negotiate with the seller. Our house actually had radon, and it's almost time to retest. I've gotten different time frames, but you know, it's been, I think, 5 years now, so we need to probably retest too. But it doesn't have to be a huge deal, But like Carrie said, you want to know, during the transaction so that we can negotiate for the seller to pay to mitigate.
Right. So factors affecting inspections. Obviously, if the seller says, listen, I'm selling as is, you have the right to do the inspections typically, at least in our area, you do. Unless the seller says, listen, I don't want inspections at all. And at that point, you've negotiated that you've accepted that. So, going in that that's something that you've accepted. But with that being said, there are also specific things that like an inspector can't see through walls. They can't see under crawl spaces. I mean, they can see under crawl spaces, but they can't see, concreted areas. So there are things that they just can't get to, or there's just no way unless they had superpowers. So those are things that obviously affect your inspections. You've got to understand that they are human. They are usually there for several hours looking at everything. They do pictures, they give you printouts, at least in our market they do. So with that being said, you're gathering all the information based on what they're giving you. But if they can't see it, they can't see it.
Right. So for example, if there is an electrical issue, but it's behind the sheetrock, there's no way for somebody physically to see, like Carrie said, unless they can see through walls, which inspectors can't. And so there are things that might come up later that, there was no way for the inspector to know.
Right. This next one, Vern, our local attorney, actually added to this, and it's water intrusion and mold growth. And that is because, number one, it's not a part of our contract really. Number two, it's because it's something that he sees most litigated. And that's the reason why we added it in. Water intrusion, one specific instance that I can remember is a wall cloud had actually sat over a property for a certain period of time. So it was like a really, really bad storm. The basement had never leaked in the ownership of anybody prior. There was no evidence that it ever leaked, but there was a wall cloud sitting over a property. So it's like, there wasn't anything that could have been done any different. Nobody failed to disclose anything. It just is what it is. It was an act of nature. And so with that being said, those are types of things that, you have to understand it. No one did it on purpose. But, there are instances where during construction, maybe something got left out too long and got, or something in between the exterior and the interior got damaged. One of the things I always say is if you walk into a house and there's a lot of Scentsies going on, or not Scentsies, really great stuff, but smells really good. But they've got a lot of aromas going. You oftentimes will miss a certain smell that might have triggered, an allergy or, musty smell because something's covering it up. So that's kind of like a red flag. Not everybody is doing it for that purpose. Some people really just like for their house to smell good and they want to have a good presentation, but sometimes it's not that. So,
right. And that's a big deal for some people because some people do have allergies and, it can be a real health issue. So it's important to know.
What basements we talked about with Kim and with Guy. In our area, we have a lot of stone basements and we have a lot of cinder block basements, and stone basements were never actually intended to be dry. If you were to listen to any of our inspectors, they were supposed to be able to seep through. Obviously gutters, downspouts, a good grade around the property are all going to preserve the property. So if you were seeing that that's not taking place, then that usually is a problem. But over time, that water will move your foundation. I've seen houses that literally look like fun houses, and it was because of the drainage was not proper. Like they lived at the bottom of a hill. So now all of a sudden the house is kind of going like this. Like it really did go like this. So things like that can totally happen because of water. And that's the reason why he said, we need to add this in. People need to understand that damage does happen, and, it's just important. And mold, of course, if you've got any kind of allergies at all, can be a really serious problem. Another would be floodplain insurance. April, do you want to hit on that one?
Yeah, so, that's one thing that as an agent, we're always checking on properties to see if a property is in a floodplain, because if it is, it's going to require additional insurance. And that's something you just need to know ahead of time, and be able to figure in that added payment each month. And a lot of it's just risk. I've had properties before that were in a floodplain, but they'd never had a flood, but just because of their location and the altitude, there was a risk there. And so, and then shop around also for pricing, because a lot of, you can get a wide range of premiums, and that's important too. But that's something like as your agent should be checking to verify. A lot of times it'll show, is it in a floodplain? Yes or no on the MLS, but we always want to double check, obviously, and make sure we have the correct information. And then, like I said, reach out to your insurance person and find out how much that premium is going to be, so that you're covered just in case there is a flood.
Absolutely. There are degrees of insurances too, depending on, when was the last time it flooded, how close are you to a certain body of water. Another thing is you could also ask if someone's had that insurance for a really long time, if you're qualified, you may be able to take over their policy. So get the same premium and everything, because say there's not been any damage or anything like that. So that insurance company is willing to continue to cover it for that price. So
Right.
definitely
And
something to check on.
Yeah, it's just kind of, I think they call it grandfathered in. And a
Mhm.
lot of times there's just a form that the seller will sign, and it just transfers the policy. It just stays with the property and it goes from one owner to the next. Super
Yeah.
easy. Like that's the best, like for me, that's the easiest that I've done with my buyers, is when we've gotten to just grandfathered in. And a lot of times the premium is lower, which is nice.
Absolutely. So the next one would be homeowners insurance. So with homeowners insurance, that was added in for a couple of reasons. Number one, in Vern's instance, he saw a case where a couple had bought a house, they had inherited some money, and they had used the bulk of that money to purchase a property, and then they did a small loan. They had never bought a house before. They didn't realize that homeowners insurance was important. They did it without an agent, so it was a for sale by owner. So there was nobody there guiding them. And so they didn't get homeowners insurance. They thought whenever the insurance company mentioned insurance that they were actually covering them, and they weren't. The homeowners, so basically the story is the house burnt to the ground. They lost everything they owned. There was nobody to insuring it, so there was nothing there to protect them. And I believe that it was in a floodplain, if I remember the story correctly. So they thought that they had insurance as a floodplain type thing. And that doesn't actually cover you as a homeowner. So they lost everything. So homeowners insurance is super important. Like April and I discussed earlier, getting them out there to look at the roof, because that seems to be the thing that dings people the most. The other thing is making sure that the insurance policy actually covers a full roof replacement, because after so much hail and damage across the country, a lot of insurance companies stopped covering a full replacement. So you want to ask, what does my insurance cover? And just because you can get a cheap premium doesn't mean that that's the coverage for you. You want to really ask the questions, what's it going to cover? Because when you need it the most is when something's happened.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right. I mean, it's one of those things that you hope you never need it, but when you do need it, you want to know the information. What's it going to cover? What's my deductible? A lot of homeowner insurance providers have different riders that you can get. So if there are different things that you're concerned about, for example, if you have a long sewer line and you have tons of trees in your yard, you might be able to get a rider for a sewer replacement if that did need to happen. I think that's one that we got when we bought this house, because it's set so far back and we do have a lot of trees. there's just different. So I always suggest that you call around and talk to some, just get some different ideas on what you can get and make sure it's in place, the day of closing.
There's even earthquake insurance. So, I mean, you definitely want to look into all of those different riders and decide which ones are important to you. And reading the binders are really, I mean, we are used to dealing in contracts, but reading those binders will make your eyes cross sometimes. So definitely asking your homeowner's insurance. You can bundle it, with your cars. If you live next to a fire hydrant or within so many feet of a fire hydrant, that's going to reduce how much you pay. Same thing if you have an alarm system, that is also going to help with your premium. So all of those things you want to really make note of, what am I near? How can it help? And then ask the correct questions, which is number one, what does it cover? If I have substantial loss, is it going to pay for it? Because what if you do have to rebuild the house? You want to make sure in today's world, is it going to cover everything that you need for it to cover? Next topic is property information. This was put in because honestly had a deal where the seller, the older we get, the less time seems to have passed. It seems like yesterday when something might have happened when it might have really been 20 years ago. And he had thought that he had recently replaced. It hadn't been too long ago is basically, I think, what he told his agent, his furnace and AC. What he'd actually done is he'd had the furnace worked on as best we can tell, not replaced. And so it really became an issue because the AC and the furnace did not sync together properly. It actually wasn't what he represented it to be. And so with that information, it's not that he did it on purpose. In his mind, that's what he remembered. And you could tell that he didn't do it on purpose.
Yeah.
But, the older we get, the more our minds start slipping. And even, your
Yeah.
first
It
house.
happens.
Yeah, it happens to all of us.
Mhm.
Even with your first house, there's things that you may not realize have taken place. So just time passes, you have family, you have kids, and things just, they get away from you. So with that being said, sellers fill out a seller's disclosure. They're going to fill it out to the best of their knowledge. Investors often don't fill out a property disclosure at all because they have not lived there, so they don't know the ins and outs. So really it boils down to you're going off someone's memory. That's the reason why it's really important to get a home inspection, because there's really no other way to combat that information or to correct that information or to even verify that information without doing that.
Right. Yeah. And most buyers don't know the condition of every single outlet in their home and all of the things. So, they're not necessarily going to be able to disclose issues, but the seller's disclosure is so important to look that over. And it will actually show like the kitchen appliances, working, not applicable, because some of the things on there, the property won't even have, a built-in vacuum system or trash compactor, different things. But it's also helpful to look at that because on there you can tell if, say, the sellers have a really nice, expensive refrigerator and they're planning to move that with them to their new property. That will be marked not applicable. So even though it's at the property, they're not necessarily leaving it. I know a lot of buyers will say, are the appliances included? And that's where I usually look. And then obviously at the, property description too, because sometimes that will say, but we can also always check it. But it's important to check on there and just see. But like Carrie said, the house inspection is so important because there's a lot of things that I'm sure, like if I went around my house, there are probably windows that are stuck or, outlets that aren't working right, just that I never use. And so I wouldn't know.
It's the same thing with buying a used car and taking it off the lot. I mean, you don't know. And the house is the very same way. And you can't really expect it to be perfect. New construction even oftentimes has a fair amount of things get dinged on a home inspection. So it's just important to know what you're moving into. It may be something you're perfectly capable of doing, or a family member is perfectly capable of doing, but at least you know. So you're
Mhm.
gathering information to make sure that that's still the right purchase for you.
Right.
The next one is appraisals. I know Kim and I talked about that. When it comes to appraisals and home inspections, they aren't the same thing. An appraisal is just verifying that the property is worth what the bank is covering. Also, it's verifying that it's safe and livable. So you're peeling paint, your handrails, things along those lines are what that appraiser is looking for. They don't get on the roof, at least not in our area. So they're not gonna, I've seen roofs pass with an appraisal that did not pass at all in an inspection, and insurance wouldn't cover it. Homeowners insurance wouldn't cover it. So there's a huge difference between what those are. So don't think that what the bank is doing as far as an appraisal is concerned is the same thing. It just simply isn't.
Right.
April?
And the appraisal, so once we go under contract, we order inspections, and then you're gonna need to chat with your lender, and there are probably some different verifications and paperwork that they're gonna need. But the lender is the one that actually orders the appraisal. And then, the fee for that will be figured into your closing costs. But the lender is actually the ones that do request that get scheduled.
Absolutely. So those are the highlights of things that go into the contract. Obviously, determining, like April said, appliances, which one you would like to have stay, which ones the sellers intend to leave. It seems that everything is negotiated. I've negotiated cows on a contract before.
Antique cars. I've had an antique car that I've thrown in there, a chair that
Yeah.
was in the living room, and she was just like, I love that chair. And I'm like, well, let's write it in.
Yeah.
The worst they can say is no. And on our contract, there's the special provisions box towards the end that we can, anything like that we can ask for. If they want to keep it, but a lot of times sellers are moving and they want new furniture, or they might not want the swing set. So it doesn't hurt to ask if you go to a property and you see, for example, a swing set or whatever that you like. And you can just, it's typically not a deal breaker,
No.
if they want to take the chair, like that's their special chair, you're not going to like walk away, but it doesn't hurt to ask if it's something that you really like.
So we know that the market's crazy, and we know that when what we're describing is a typical market. But if you're willing to pay a price, as Kim had mentioned, it really is relative to what you can afford. So if you do need closing costs, if you are going to ask for specific pieces that are in the property and the seller says, listen, I'll leave it, but you're going to pay for it. We just need to make sure that we're covering it and making it an offer that the seller is going to accept. So right now, unfortunately, getting super great deals, it doesn't seem to be happening anywhere in the country. But if we can at least get you to where you can do an inspection and at least gain the knowledge of whether or not you're going to be able to maintain this house or get it up to your standards, that's what we really want to do for you.
Right.
So if you're looking to buy or sell or invest, be sure and give us a call at 785-213-5188. And our email is letstalk@preferredadvisorsteam.com. Thanks for joining us.